So, what is the role of the international process in assisting adaptation to climate change? There are 6 ways that I want to introduce now. The first way in which the international process helps in adaptation is by bringing in the science. And by the science here, we mean the latest information on how much is the climate changing and how much is it going to change in order to be able to inform how much adaptation is needed. And the science is brought, or the international process gets it from the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. Many of you might have heard about it. It brings together scientists all over the world to contribute into the science to understand and improve on our understanding on the scale of climate change and then the projected future. That is the first part. The second part, the international process through the UNFCCC sets the goals and objectives for adaptation. For example, the goals on enhancing the adaptive capacity, of building the resilience, of reducing vulnerability. It sets these goals as the overall framework under which we should be undertaking adaptation. And these are the goals that drive the countries, the organizations, all actors and stakeholders to pursue the same goals on how we adapt to climate change. The third way in which the international process helps in adaptation is then based on the goals and the objectives. The international process establishes guidelines on how to do adaptation, the step-by-steps or the steps that need to be taken to adapt to climate change, to plan for adaptation, to implement the measures, to review the progress that is being made, and to put together the support that's required. Then the fourth element is establishing processes that provide the opportunity for the countries to actually apply the guidelines to achieve the goals that I just mentioned, that would then help to build a solid climate change adaptation response. Such processes, for example, are the national adaptation plans. They were established in 2010 and they enable the countries to identify their adaptation needs and then be able to design adaptation measures that would respond to those adaptation needs. And the advantage of these processes is that they are established under the process with deliberate support mechanisms that help the countries on how to undertake adaptation step by step and all the way. A fifth element on how the international process helps on climate change adaptation is to put together the support arrangements for the developing countries. And here the support arrangements have 2 dimensions. There is the technical support. The technical support includes committees and expert groups that are established by the UNFCCC or the governments themselves. These committees and bodies help the countries to undertake the processes that I just mentioned, to apply the guidelines, and these committees also help to develop further technical tools and materials that can be applied by their countries in their work. They also help to bring the countries together to learn from each other, to do different activities. And they also undertake specific work that may be requested by the governments on how to undertake different things. For example, how do we assess progress that we are making? How effective are the measures we are undertaking? And these bodies are helping the international process with that. And then inside the technical support as well, there's the role of the organizations. There are many organizations across the world that have expertise on adaptation. For example, looking at water, there are organizations that are working on water. Looking at health, there are organizations that are working on health that would be best suited to help countries on how to come up with the adaptation measures for these unique and specific sectors. And then the second dimension under the support is the financial support. The international process sets up the financial architecture to ensure that there is support to the developing countries to develop plans to adapt to climate change and to implement the policies, projects, and programs that they are identifying through their plans that would help them to adapt to climate change. And of course, to undertake a suite of activities that would make sure that they strengthen and continue to build their adaptive capacity at the national level. And there are different funds under the convention. For example, we can talk about the Green Climate Fund that many people know. There is also the Least Developed Countries Fund, the Special Climate Change Fund, and the Adaptation Fund. There are a couple of funds that are established under the convention to assist countries with financial support to do adaptation. Lastly, but not the least, of course, on how the international process helps in adaptation is by providing platforms for learning. It is a key component for providing that platform where countries can learn from each other on what works best where, including what does not work or what hasn't worked, and what are some of the best practices, and what are some of the challenges that people are encountering, and how can they overcome these challenges. And these platforms also provide the space for innovation, coming up with new innovative approaches that people even didn't think about. So they're a very important mechanism. So in short, the 6 ways is the science, the goals, objectives, guidelines, processes, support arrangements, and these platforms that all build a very solid architecture to help advance adaptation. And now, in terms of where are we in terms of adaptation to climate change, one of the good news is that at least each country has undertaken one measure in one way or the other in undertaking adaptation, whether it was to do assessments or to actually implement deliberate adaptation measures. The 48 least developed countries, all of them have what we call a national adaptation program of action. These were instruments or processes that were set under the UNFCCC back in 2001 to enable these countries to identify their urgent and immediate adaptation priorities that could not wait while the process was still evolving. Many of them have implemented and are continuing to implement priority adaptation measures that were identified in these plans. And currently, many developing countries, including the least developed countries, are actively engaging in preparing their national adaptation plans. And as part of that, they are undertaking multiple activities of building institutional arrangements, establishing regulatory and institutional frameworks, and so on and so forth, doing assessments on climate change. And some of them are building monitoring and evaluation systems. And a whole lot of work is happening around the world by the developing countries, including even by the developed countries. And also, the convention funds, as I did mention, in many ways are already providing support to the countries. The Green Climate Fund in particular has launched its operations and is actively supporting countries on formulating their adaptation plans, and it is also funding countries on several adaptation programs that they have already identified through prior existing plans. And there's one important thing that also I want to highlight in terms of the state of where we are. There's a lot of learning and there are a lot of emerging good practices on some of the innovations that are happening. And these are expanding and evolving in different ways and in very important ways across the world.